All right, brothers and sisters, last Sunday we began this new series on the art of neighboring. So by the way, if you haven't received a book, whether you're part of a community group or not, if you would like a book, they're $9. If you need help, we'll gift it to you. It's what we're going through in our community group, and these 4 Sundays we're going through this as well. Great to see you, Barlinda. Great to see the tribe. Our children's table is filling up today, which is always very exciting to me. The subtitle of this is Building Genuine Relationships Right Outside Your Door. What a great subtitle. I introduced this 4-part series last week by asking the question, what if Jesus meant that we should love our literal neighbors, like the actual neighbors that live in your neighborhood, in your community? We talked about taking the Great Commission literally, which is the most important relationship. There are 2 relationships, really, that we are to grow in our life. Some people would say maybe 3. But the first relationship is obviously with God. That's the most important, and every other relationship flows out of that relationship. And then there are the relationships that we have, or the relationship that we have with our neighbors. Some people would say the relationship with those that we have inside the church, kind of our church family relationships. There's somewhat of a special and unique calling that God has given us to love. As the world sees our love, they'll see that we are His. And then there are the relationships that we have with those outside the church, and many of them are in our neighborhood. So however you want to divide that up, relationship with God, relationship with our neighbors. So in order to actually do this, we've got to overcome some obstacles. And one of the massive obstacles that gets in the way is time. Anybody have just too much time on their hands? There's no way around it. Most of us spell love, T-I-M-E. Now, some people are wired a little bit more. If you follow love languages, there's quality time. But I find that most people appreciate time. We have to create space in our lives to build relationships with those who live near us. So, some of you might be more or less like me in this sense, that life is pretty busy for me. It's probably pretty busy for you. When we think about moms, families, parents, life is pretty full. But whatever season of life you're in, whether you're close to retirement, whether you're retiring, whether you have a baby, whether you're single, whether you're about to give birth. I mean, you guys must have lots of time, right? You don't even have a baby yet, so you probably have lots of time. This is the thing that I hate is a strong word, but probably the thing I dislike most about living in our very expensive DC suburban community. I'm busy. My neighbors are busy. Most of us are just too busy, or we struggle to use the discretionary time that we have for the most important things. I was just thinking this morning as I was going to the bathroom and thinking about time. Somehow I've found the time to train for a marathon. Why? Well, because that's a priority to me. That's become a priority, so I've carved out the time. But am I carving out time for the most important relationships? So who doesn't have an extra project to do, right? Or a hobby to practice, or a happy hour to go to, or a million other things that we could do rather than invest time creating and growing healthy relationships with those around us. In the book, The Art of Neighboring, the authors share 3 lies that many of us wrestle with. I won't spend too much time with it, but lie number 1, things will settle down someday. This has been one of the biggest struggles of my life. Not necessarily that things will settle down one day, but I'm just striving until I get to there. And what I've realized, and I wish that I could have realized this 20 years ago, but I realized is there's always a next there. And when you get to the next there, it's interesting how that didn't free up my schedule. Somehow that didn't free everything up. Things will settle down someday is probably a lie. Because, you know, I'm busy parenting, but then at some point I'll be busy grandparenting, hopefully, and busy doing this, and there's lots of things going on. Lie number two, more, just more will be enough. Now, let's be very clear. Everyone needs enough. And there's an expert in happiness who I follow, and I like the way he defines it. Basically, once you have enough, and maybe just a little bit more than enough, your life is pretty much satiated with what you need. You don't get happier adding more and more and more. Just a little bit more is usually not enough to slow everything down. How about lie number 3? Everyone lives like this. I mean, I've already said one of the things that I hate about living in, or dislike, one of the things that bothers me about living in this area is everybody's busy, right? Well, yes and no, but why do I want to be like everybody else? In fact, one of my kids said yesterday something along those lines that, well, everybody, like X, Y, Z. Everybody does it that way, Well, why do you want to be like everyone else? Don't be like everyone else. Be the best version of you. So if there's one thing that I really want you to take away from this whole series, what does the best version of you as a neighbor look like to your neighbor? Because that is the version of you that God wants to use. Why am I out there for hours? Yesterday I ran for 2 hours. Next Saturday I'm running 18 miles. I've got 3 hours blocked out for that. Why would I do that? See, when you're in the middle of that, it's very important to ask, why am I doing this? This hurts. Man, this stinks. As I'm cramming down, trying to swallow something, snot's running down, I'm sweating. Things are nasty. My toenails literally have fallen off. They're bloody. I got blisters under my feet look nasty. Why would somebody go through that? And the very simple answer for that, and I hope you'll answer similar questions like this, or you'll answer in a similar way. I want to be my best. I want to be the absolute best version of myself for myself. I want to be the best version of myself for my wife and my kids, for my neighbors, for the church. Don't you want the best version of Pastor Ed as your pastor, right? You want me to be as healthy and energetic and focused and disciplined as possible. And that's one of the reasons why. Do you have to run a marathon to be your best? Not necessarily, but that's part of my journey. And so hopefully something similar will be your journey. So with that in mind, we've got a great example, to understate it, in Jesus, and a not so great example in Martha. So let's start with Jesus. We might say that Jesus, and the authors of the book say this, they say that Jesus was likely the healthiest person ever to live. Maybe other than Adam. Do you think Adam was healthier than Jesus? No, Jesus had to be healthier than Adam, right? He had to be. If you think about what was Mary's health like Mary had to be pretty healthy, right? The mother of the Messiah. She probably, came from a healthy lifestyle. So let's just say that Jesus was one of, if not the healthiest and most balanced person ever to live. His life was full. He had a lot going on. He accomplished a lot. He did a lot in a very short amount of time, but he never seemed to be in a hurry. He never seemed to be short with people. He was direct at times, and we should be direct at times too. Jesus knew and was laser focused on his mission. He knew his purpose, and he didn't allow himself to get distracted, which is one of the reasons why I'm so busy. I'm so busy because what did I used to do before I was running 2 hours on a Saturday morning at 6 o'clock? What did I do? It's easy to be distracted with so many things. There's lots of things you could be busy doing. Other than just being the Son of God, Jesus was committed to silence and solitude. He got the most important priorities right. Mainly loving God and loving his neighbors well from his connection, as an overflow of his connection with God. And it was the most important relationship to him. He set the pattern for us to follow. There are many examples. Let me just give you 2. From Mark chapter 1, verse 35. Very short little narrative here. Very early in the morning. Just to make sure that you know how early it was before it was light, so it was still dark outside. It was early enough to still be dark. Jesus got up. He left the house and he went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Jesus was so busy that it's like the busier that he got, the more he had to pull away and pray and make sure that he was connected to God. Now, I was never a morning person. I always liked to sleep in. I was never my best friend growing up, he was the kind of guy that he could sleep till like 11 or later. on any given day. I was never like that. I mean, I could only ever, like if I was really up late doing all kinds of crazy things, maybe I could sleep till like 8:30 or something. But I was never an early riser. But when Jesus saved me, I was taught this principle, that having a morning quiet time where I meet with God is an essential regular practice. Now, that doesn't mean that it's essential that you get up early in the morning. Some people are better at night, some people better in the middle of the day, whatever. But I wish it was earlier and I gave more time to it. I wish I was more committed to solitary, I almost said solitary confinement, to solitude and silence, and more focused earlier in my walk with Christ. But having a daily time set aside to read God's word and pray is essential to having healthy relationships in our lives. Starts with God, and then as we receive God's love, we have love for our neighbors. So I like to say, and sometimes, especially if they're Christians in a wedding message, human love is great. Like human love is great, but it has limits, doesn't it? We all know that, right? We make a commitment. Those of you who have been married or are married, you stand up and you make a commitment, and there's never a caveat, right? So I officiated for Amir and Natalie. Amir just had me looking at me. I'm just picking on him. And it was like, Amir, do you commit to love Natalie? So this was almost 6 years ago, right? Did you, in October, I believe, right? October? So, I didn't say, okay, Amir, do you commit to love Natalie Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturdays? Good hair days. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever, you can still, go talk to your ex-girlfriend. No, it's ludicrous to think that way, right? It's insane to think that way. It's unconditional. It's, groom, do you commit to love this woman, period? Not the potential version of that person. Not this person when they're their best. But I'm committing to love this person as they are right now. But then that's exciting, right? That's great in a wedding. But then a couple years goes by, and there are some bad hair days, and you get pregnant, and then all kinds of things change. And then the question is, am I still going to love? See, I don't know how the world does it, but human love has a capacity that empties, but God's love never empties. There's a resource that we have as Christian husbands or wives or friends or neighbors or just Christians in general. There's a love that we can tap into that allows us to love someone who hates us. And in fact, that is the command. Jesus says, what good is it for you to love people who love you back? I want you to go out and love people who are going to hate you. Not because of you, but because of me. So don't be surprised. Don't be surprised, church, when we're standing up for the truth and we're trying to love people as best we can. And one of the ways we do that is we speak the truth in love to people. Don't be surprised when they don't get it. And remember where you were at a time, where I was at a time when I didn't get it and I rejected it and I didn't want anything to do with it. So, back to the point. In order to love our neighbors well, especially those neighbors who have dogs that poop on our yard and who park backwards in the wrong place. We have a car right now parked right out in front of my house where I can't wash my car in the right spot, parked in the wrong direction. It's been sitting there for like 2 weeks. I have no idea whose car it is. So this morning, I walked out, Pastor Ed, filled up with love, ready to worship Jesus. And I walked out, and in my heart, I cursed the owner of that. I just confessed that to you. I saw the car there. It looks worse every day. The pollen and everything. It hasn't moved. No idea. I'm like, and I'm about to preach a message on loving my neighbor. Thanks, Dell. You like that, right? Hey, let's keep it real. Like Elliot said, let's keep it real. Some of you might feel that way. That's not a way that I feel about a particular person. I have no idea who that person is. Maybe that person is up the street, and I don't know what they're going through. Karen and Dell and I and Laura, we've been processing. There's a real tragic situation, a family here at Lakelands Park. And when you have a loss, especially if you have a sudden loss in your life, you may not take care of your car. You may park it in the wrong spot. Maybe someone got sick, or I have no idea. So My human love for the neighbor who I don't know yet has an end, but God's love does not have an end. God has more love, and I need to tap into that relationship first. That's the priority, and Jesus gave that example to us. I hope you have a regular time to pray and read God's word too. If not, we have some resources, some tools that we'd like to put in your hand and walk with you and just help you to develop that. And if you are in a place where you just need some encouragement, just put QT, not QD, but QT, quiet time, on your Connect card, or just come talk to me, and we'd love to walk with you in that. One more example from Jesus from Luke chapter 4. Luke chapter 4, starting in verse 42. At daybreak, so again, still early, maybe not as early as before, but at daybreak, Jesus went out to a solitary place. So there was something about silence and solitude that was very important for Jesus in the midst of all of his busyness. And would you say that it's important for us? One of the rules that rule. Who loves rules? I hate rules. But one of the rules, one of the guidelines that we're trying to, we instated it at one point in our family, and then Laura and I, we got away from enforcing it. That ever happen, parents? Maybe it's just us. But the rule is after dinner, our phones are on, or they stay in the kitchen. So if you've got to go check, you got to text somebody, you get up and go, that's fine, you can do it. But if we're hanging out, if we're in the living room, whatever we're doing, like don't stay, it's good to have a rest, right? It's just good to get away from that. And Jesus certainly, again, didn't wrestle with social media, but there was a lot of busyness. There were a lot of voices in his life. Notice what it says. The people were looking for him, and when they came to where he was, they tried to keep him from leaving there. But he said, and again, this is out of the overflow of his silence and solitude, I must proclaim the good news of the kingdom of God to other towns also. He was focused on his mission. Notice what he said. Because this is why I was sent. And he kept on preaching in the synagogues of Judea. That is not necessarily my mission. My mission isn't to go preaching through the synagogues of Judea. And my mission isn't necessarily to preach, to proclaim the good news of the kingdom of God in all sorts of other towns. That's not my mission either. The point of me even sharing this is to, number one, make sure that we're clear that Jesus was clear about his mission and his purpose, and he lived out of his mission and purpose. And that sets the example for us, that we would know our mission and that we would be focused and committed to it. We see the fruit of Jesus' quiet time here. He was able to balance the busyness of being the Messiah and doing all the Messiah stuff. Like, that's a big duty, right? Like, the list of Messiah responsibilities is massive. But he balanced that with slowing down and practicing silence and solitude in God's presence. That is what enabled him to be confident about his mission, which was proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. I just finished a book yesterday. I'm not going to tell you, I'm a little embarrassed by it. It was recommended by like a trainer that I listened to. It's not necessarily a godly philosophy, but there's some truth in it that's really good. And in there, the guy talks about, I know this is a little controversial, some things that men need versus things that women need. And very interesting. I really resonated with this, and I think probably all of you might agree with this. He talked about how important it is for men to get alone in silence and work out their mission in silence and then be held accountable and be encouraged with other men who are going in that same direction. Whereas women tend to not need that silence and solitude as much to work that out. They need to be in circles with other women to talk about it and work through it together. Now, that may or may not fit you, but Starbucks is kind of the model. Just go in Starbucks. How many construction workers do you see sitting around, tables and drinking coffee and working out their mission? I mean, you might see some hipsters in there doing that. Some guys with nice big mustaches and curly cues and, funky looking shoes or something like that. But you go in Starbucks and you will see women almost without fail doing that all the time. So I don't know how that applies to you or not. I don't know. But whatever you need to discover and clarify the mission of your life. There's the mission, right? We join God in the restoration of all things. It's the mission of the church, and we do some things that fulfill that mission. And in our community group, there's a little bit of a different mission. But your mission, your personal mission, or your family mission is going to be unique to you and your shape. It's very important. The more we follow Jesus' example, the more undistracted our lives and undistracted our lives are, and the more the easier we are, or the more focused we are on the main thing. The more we will love God and by extension love our neighbors well. Now, there's another example in the Bible that helps us point to a better way. It points us to a better way, rather. In fact, it's the story in Luke 10, right after the story we looked at last week, right after the story of the Good Samaritan. And I think it's important that that there's a tie between that story and the next story, at least as it pertains to the book of Luke. Probably on purpose. There were two sisters who had the privilege of being close with Jesus. Just imagine the privilege, and I'm going to explain to you why this was such a big deal, the privilege of being a woman that was close to the rabbi. They had invited Jesus over for a meal, which in and of itself was radical. Imagine that. Imagine inviting Jesus over. Imagine if Jesus was coming to the newcomer dessert, Karen. How different, I'm not trying to put Karen on the spot, how different would your preparation be? Like we had the Christmas party at the Bustinchis. Imagine, I mean, it was extravagant. It was awesome as far as I was concerned. How different might it have been if Jesus was coming? What if Jesus was coming to dinner at your house? How much work or preparation do you think you would put in? What would you be focused on if Jesus was coming to your house for dinner tonight? Now, with that in mind, listen to what happened. Luke chapter 10, again, this is just following the story of the Good Samaritan. How did that story end? It ended with Jesus saying to the man who, the tax expert, the law expert rather, tax expert, I just did my taxes, the law expert, and Jesus said to him, now go and do likewise. And then Luke goes right into this. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. Radical. That was countercultural. That shouldn't have happened. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. Me too. If Jesus was coming over, I mean, can you imagine walking in and like your mud room is dirty? You know, your all the toys that imagine, Charity. Jesus coming over to your home, you got, 10,000 kids running around, stuff's thrown. Imagine what it would take to get your house ready for Jesus. I mean, what would you have been doing? She came to him. Listen to what she says. Listen to how bold she is. There's a lot to admire about Martha. She came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all this work? I've been preparing for you. I mean, for days we've been preparing, vacuuming and dusting and, whatever. All your favorite dishes. We got the list from your disciples. We talked to your mother, Tell her to help me. That's me. That's what I would have said. 41, verse 41. Martha, Martha. Just imagine how he would have said this. Martha, Martha. The Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. I've read a few places where they tie these words to the number of dishes being served. I don't know if that's exactly accurate, but imagine, you're worried and upset about many dishes. Only a few things are needed. Indeed, we only need one. We just need peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. The point of us getting together isn't eating an extravagant meal. The point of us getting together is me and what I have to say. I mean, just think about the point. I'm so grateful right now. This will probably change in the future, but I'm so grateful. Our men's group meets right here, and the women's group, by the way, not Karen's, but Karen's meets all over the world, and internationally, all over the web, and in other various places. But I'm so glad we meet here in the clubhouse, men's and women's group. There's nothing to prepare. There's nothing extravagant. No, there's no host. that has to do anything. Bruce is the host of the men's group, and there's a little bit of rearranging of chairs or whatever, but pretty much we just walk in, we bring our coolers, sometimes we have a few drinks and snacks or whatever. There's no preparation. The point of the gathering is the guys. That's cool. It's kind of unintentional. We just wanted to meet in the neighborhood and have a space, and unintentionally, Bruce does not have to spend any time hosting. He just opens the door. How great is that? Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. Preparation for guests is not unimportant. Jesus isn't saying that. But time with our guests is the most important thing. Mary was doing the one thing that mattered most, listening to Jesus. Even though it was countercultural and could have had shameful consequences. It's important to note some cultural nuance here. In the Hebrew culture of the day, sitting at the feet of someone meant a disciple-teacher relationship. But in that culture, women weren't supposed to be students, much less sitting at the feet of the rabbi. This isn't just any rabbi. This is rabbi with a big capital R. Rabbi, the Hebrew word for rabbi, Rabboni, it means great one. In fact, with the I on it, it's the determined form. It means my great one. Jesus was the great one, and Mary risked everything to sit at his feet. I don't know if you have caught that in that story, but what she was doing, they were both doing kind of the right thing, right? Martha was doing the thing that she thought was the culturally accepted right thing. That's what the woman was supposed to do. The woman is supposed to be preparing the stuff for the men who are sitting at the feet of the rabbi. I mean, churches that get this wrong. And we're wrestling with the role of women, and we've talked a lot about this with our board. The structure of our church allows for women to be in senior leadership like men. And we have senior women, well, at least a woman voice. Karen's a big part of that. And we acknowledge men as the pastor elders. Women can be part of our executive leadership team. And man, churches that aren't having women voices in the leadership are really missing out. And I don't want to say too much more about that, but a woman's identity back then was tied to her ability to be a good hostess, and Martha was good hostessing to the next degree. Thankfully, Mary had taken up her cross and decided to follow Jesus and was willing to pay the price culturally to be faithful to her Messiah. So for those of us who struggle with busyness, I'm at the front of the line. Our dilemma is bigger than a shortage of time. It's a problem of priorities. We tend to let the urgent things crowd out the important things. Are we missing the main thing because we are busy doing good things? Martha was doing good things, but she wasn't doing the most important thing. The story of these two sisters teaches us that we must live counterculturally in order to experience the life that Jesus truly wants us to live. We must learn how to say no to good things so that we can say yes to the main thing. I've had to say no to things like sleep in order that I can get up early and run, or other types of things. I've had to say no to certain things like toenails. Like, okay, I don't need that toenail. All right, that kind of hurts a little bit, but that's a dumb example. But we've got to learn to say no to good things so that we can say yes to the main thing. In his book, The Life You've Always Wanted, they quote this in the book, but I thought it was worth sharing. John Ortberg, one teacher that I have really loved reading and listening to, he states this, quote, "Hurry is the great enemy of spiritual life in our day." He coins the phrase, hurry sickness. And he goes on to say, quote, "The reason hurrying is so dangerous is because love and hurry are not at all compatible. Love always takes time, and time is the one thing that hurried people don't have." I've shared with you before the discipline that I try. As I leave my house every day, when I leave, I try to walk out the door and stop, just even for a second, and look to my left and look to my right and just see if there are neighbors out. Now, did I do that this morning? I mean, I kind of ran out grumbling There was nobody out there, thankfully, but I kind of grumbled at this neighbor who was parked right there. But it's a good discipline. When I come home, I try to get out. I try to pull in my car and look first, and then get out of my car and just see. And before I run into my house, I try to just look if there are neighbors. Some days are better than others, to be honest. Some days I see someone, and I don't want to go talk to them because I know, oh, geez, if I go talk to so-and-so, I might have to lose my time. So I'm embarrassed to say that, but that's where I am. Psalm 90, verse 12 is helpful as we consider the most important priorities of life. Lord, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. You know, in the Hebrew, it's actually present to you a lev shomeah, a heart of wisdom, that we would present to God, that what we're giving to God is a heart of wisdom because of the way that we're living, because we're counting our days, because we're recognizing how frail, how fragile, how fleeting our days are. And so we're living locked in, focused on our mission, so that we're saying, God, here's a heart of wisdom. A lev shomeah. Life is short. We all know it. The more we consider the brevity of life and take the Great Commandment seriously, the better we are able to keep the main thing the main thing. There's a great illustration. I want to kind of wrap it up kind of with this. Great illustration you probably heard. Put this into action. You've probably seen this. This is the big rocks, small rocks picture. I don't know that you can kind of see it there. It's not super clear, but here's the deal. The big rocks in life are the most important things. So what are the most important things? Like, think about it. I want to encourage you over this next week. Spend a little bit of quiet time and just write out, what are the big rocks? Just put big rocks and list those out. What are the big rocks in your life? Like, it may be time listening to God, His Word, and His Spirit, His people, practically loving others. Might include self-care. You know, I don't know what you'll have on your list, but clarify, what are the big rocks in your life, the most important things? If you leave those out, you'll never get them in at the end. So start with the big rocks. Put the big rocks of your life in the jar of your life. Put the big rocks in first. Make sure the most important things are on your calendar. And then there are the moderately important things, the pebbles, right? The pebbles are the moderately important things. So you put the big rocks in first, then you can kind of scatter the pebbles, and the pebbles will fill in some of the smaller gaps around those large rocks. I don't know what that might be in your life, but it might be like being on time. I'm working on that. Staying organized, having a balanced life, maybe even living a healthy and fit life. These are not unimportant things. They just need to be kept in the right perspective. What are those moderately important things? And then finally, sand is like unimportant things. Now, unimportant things it's not that they're things that we shouldn't have in our life, but they're not as important. They're unimportant. There are many unimportant things that we do. And they often feel more urgent, like scrolling through social media, preparing extra things for a meal, having just the right decor, or shopping for one more thing that we definitely do not need. I don't know, whatever's on your list. What are the things in your life that they're part of your life, but they're unimportant? When we say, I don't have time to get to know my neighbor, what we're really saying is, I don't consider that to be important. We live in tension between the urgent and the important. There's a great little book I read many years ago called The Tyranny of the Urgent. Have you read that? I encourage you to find that little pamphlet. Probably find it online easily. We're often pulled into the vortex of doing urgent but important things. And as a pastor, I often get calls and invitations to things that are unimportant or at least less important than the important things, like serving you. I get a regular invitation to somebody in our community to meet with. He's part of another church. He's got a pastor. He's got a men's group. He wants to meet with me every week. I'm like, bro, I'm praying for you. I love you, whatever. But I don't. If you're part of our church, I'd be happy to, but you already have a pastor. Go to your pastor. So that's just part of my thing. You probably get invitations all the time to other things, right? It's not that they're irrelevant, but they're not as important. I need to make sure that I have time to serve you, to be present with those I'm already committed to being in community with, and making sure I have time for my family. If and when our priorities are determined by what's urgent, our lives won't match up with our intentions or our profession of faith if we say we're following Jesus. Because following Jesus means denying ourselves, taking up our cross and following him. So many of you know my hero is my grandmother. I'll try to do this without crying, but she recently upgraded her status to present with Jesus. That's the biggest upgrade you can get. After living a long and faithful life of service to God and others, she wrote this devotional prayer that she shared with me when I left for college back in 1998. I used it every day while I was a student, and for years beyond that, and I misplaced it. I misplaced it for years. This was a little devotional thing, some prayers that she had wrote that was her daily commitment. Incredible. So I had misplaced it. After she passed in March, I found it again. And there are 7 areas of focus, 2 that are relevant and I think helpful for us as we apply this message. She surrendered her schedule and her time to the Lord and asked for discernment. I'll share these on social media and on here. I'll put them in this week's email, but here are the 2 prayers. And then I promise we'll wrap it up here. Schedule for me. So there were 7 areas. These are 2 of the 7. So this was her prayer. Schedule for me. This day, bring into my life everything and only whatever and whomever you ordain in person, by letter, email, phone call, thought, impression, prayer, event, or circumstance. Interruptions and changes are not accidental or incidental, but my opportunities and your appointments for my good and for your glory. So be interruptible. And then the next one, grant me discernment. Show me your priorities for the hours of this day. As I follow your guidance, give me your strength and wisdom to accomplish the task that you've specifically appointed for me. I want to hear your voice clearly, obey and follow you fully. May I be careful to abide in you and maintain my first love relationship with you. While I do the good works you have commanded, may they not deter me from a close walk with you. Man, thank you, Grandma. I'll share those with you again, but I really think this can be summed up by praying this simple prayer. We talked about this with the men's group, and it's in the book. God, what would you have me to do next? Just a great prayer. God, what would you have me to do next? One practice that I believe can help us actually love our neighbors as we love ourselves is to spend a little more unhurried time around them. So here's the challenge. This week, would you consider in your schedule carving out 30 to 60 minutes, however that looks, in your front yard or in the common area of your neighborhood, whatever that looks like, and just see what happens? You might also take a walk around your neighborhood. How about this? Introduce yourself to people when you see them, or strike up a conversation with those you already know. And don't be afraid to say, man, I know, I've seen you walking. I walk Harris to school, every day. We say hi and bye, but I've never stopped. Hey, what's your name? I'm Ed. It's great to meet you. We recently practiced this with our crossing guard and found out that Stan is a believer and loves the Lord. And we also recently found out that he has cancer and he has surgery on Tuesday. And Karis and I have seen his body deteriorate over the last couple months. It's been very sad. And so we're just saying, man, Stan, we are praying for you. So if you think of Stan, the crossing guard, he's having surgery on Tuesday. And he told me when I talked to him last week, and this is the crossing guard. It's not like I'm stopping for coffee and like we got a long conversation. It's just these short conversations that God opened up. And he said, man, I'm not sure if I'll be back in the fall. And man, my heart just, kind of breaks over that. And I only learned that just because just trying to stop and just ask a name and get to know somebody. Introduce yourself, put the B and L in bless. The B and L of bless into action. Begin with prayer and just listen. Finally, in 2 weeks, we're going to have a bit of a commitment to neighboring service. We kind of did this on the fly, Elliot and I, but Elliot will have a guest helping lead worship along with Amir that day. We're going to take communion together. It's going to be the first Sunday of May, so May 7th. And I'd like every one of us to make a concrete commitment to loving our literal neighbors in some tangible way. So maybe you've already made that commitment. Maybe between now and the next 2 weeks, there'll be some clear thing. I want you to pray that prayer. God, what would you have me to do next in loving my neighbors? And you have a couple of weeks. Think through it. Pray through it each day. Jot down. Think of what God is saying to you. You don't have to necessarily share it publicly in any way, but we'll invite you to share those things if you want. I think that would be encouraging. Listen to what he says. Maybe it will be throwing a block party or just inviting someone over in the front yard for a drink or a snack. Maybe it will be serving a neighbor in a specific way or doing something for a new neighbor. Just imagine, brothers and sisters, what's possible as a small but growing number of authentic Jesus followers takes the Great Commandment seriously, or a little bit more seriously, not that we haven't taken it seriously. Imagine how different it would be to personally know more of your little neighbors, to know their names, what they do, what burdens them, what they need. Imagine your neighbors knowing your name, knowing what you're going through, knowing the burdens that you have, and coming around you and caring for you. Imagine the impact we can make in this community by just authentically loving our literal neighbors. Let's pray that and just see and imagine what God will do as we simply trust and obey Jesus.